Hey, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Sunday. Today's March 15th, 2026, and hope you all are doing well. And it looks like I am lagging a little bit, so I'm going to see if I can close some things here. But I hope you're doing well. And let's see here, what can I close? Today, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically go over a few things relating to my story. I've been going through that for the last few days, and I think it's been pretty helpful to a lot of people. A lot of people have been giving me a lot of feedback, both in comments as well as just behind the scenes. And it seems like a lot of people are telling me that this is helpful, both in terms of just hearing my story, but also to remind them of what's going on in their world and the need to really dig deep into just the reality of so many things that they've been through, and they're trying to, like, we're all really trying to interpret better. We're all trying to figure out what exactly happened to us in our time in Christianity. And I think a lot of us arguably are pretty we're pretty aware on one sense and one level what happened, but we're also very much trying to figure out if there's more to it in the sense of the worldview level. And I've been really encouraging people, and if I'm just going to give a quick reminder and overview of this for anyone that hasn't been watching, that one of the big things I'm going to focus on in this series, which will be several more parts, is that we're looking at both the reality of people's journeys, what they've actually been through physically, what they've heard, what they've been taught, how they've been indoctrinated, but then also on the deeper level, like, what is it that has been happening on the deeper level? And I really encourage you in that to just dig deeper. So if anyone's in the in the live stream today, could you please just give me a thumbs up or something, some kind of note, if you can hear me clearly? Hopefully everything's coming through loud and clear. And a few people said the other day my audio was going in and out. Some people said no, it's not. Some people said yes, it is. So I changed the setting. I'm hoping that it's going to fix that. But if anyone can just let me know that they see me, hear me, and that I'm loud and clear. And again, happy Sunday to you all. So what I want to do, I don't see it coming up, but I'm just going to dive in here. Hopefully someone can confirm for me shortly that we are good to go in terms of you hearing me. What I wanted to do is just go back a little bit to some aspects of my childhood. I've been talking through different. Oh, thanks, Davey Bob. Appreciate that very much. Awesome. I want to go back through a couple things, from my childhood that I think are important to go through, just in terms of clarifying sort of where I've been. And I'm going to do eventually sort of summarize this in a much faster, cleaner way through an interview I'm going to do of myself, where I'll be both the interviewer and the interviewee. Have to record both parts. But thanks, David Bob. Appreciate it. Glad the video is coming through as well. So in terms of, and I've also closed a lot of stuff, so hopefully I'm not lagging too much here. So I think there's some benefits to going back to what we've been through. And of course, my story is going to be vastly different from your story. But I think some of the things I want to share might relate to you and might at least trigger some thoughts. And I really do hope that it does help. It's a big deal. I wanted to talk a little bit more about my dad. I thought I'd start there this morning. And his influence on my Christianity was profound, both in just the overall sense of, he obviously was leading me into Christianity, but also just his personality, as well as his personality quirks, for good or bad, did lead me into different ways. So my dad I mentioned before that my dad had come from a family where his parents were liberal Christians in a sense, compared to conservative Baptist Christianity. They had gone to a Lutheran church, high Lutheran church, that, as a kid, I didn't even know that kind of thing existed. But when I did go there eventually at some point for Christmas or something, or Thanksgiving, it was very strange to me to see the Presbyterian church and the way they did things. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't feel like church. It felt like a weird Catholic kind of thing. and probably still would. But hey, Panda, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my going through today my story about my dad. My dad, he came to know the Lord later in life. Somebody had led him to the Lord, and then I talked about how he did a basketball tour where he was, very, very good with, playing basketball, very, very good. And he went on a tour, worldwide with a group of other Christians where they'd play teams like a college, and then they present the gospel after having a little fun playtime of basketball. Went to, I think, all over Asia and so forth. But in terms of my daily life, one of the things that stood out to me from the earliest days, well, two or three things, I should say. One of them was his anger. My dad was an extremely angry man, and it wouldn't always be visible. When he was certainly around people at church, he was just the pinnacle of I'm calm, I'm collected, I'm a nice Christian man. And I'm not saying that there's no part of his story that would have elaborated it better and said, well, why were you angry? What happened in your life? I'm sure there's more to the story, but um, when I was growing up, you definitely had to walk on eggshells around him, and it felt like the hypocrisy of Christianity got shown to me pretty early in life. And I've talked before about how it came out a little bit uh, again later when I lived with my grandmom for a few years. She had a real big old house, like a 150-year-old house, lots of rooms. It was halfway between my parents' house, which was near the Philadelphia airport, and my Bible college. It was just a lot closer. So I lived with her for a few years. So my commute to Bible college was a lot shorter, and I helped her. I fixed up some of the rooms and so forth, helped her cut her grass, and just took care of groceries. It was good, but both my dad and her were typical in the sense that back then a lot of people listened to Christian radio like nonstop, not just like music, like preachers. At least in my experience, I knew so many people that did that. They would just listen to Christian radio, to the preachers all the time. And I don't think it's as prevalent these days. And especially because, back then it was like the old time preachers, like the fire and brimstone, the long Southern drawls. And these were guys probably from the South who were pulpit pounders, and they ended up being on the radio all the time. Some of them might have been already deceased by the time I was listening to them. Maybe they were reruns. But my dad and my grandma both would have Christian radio on in their homes all the time. And so it kind of dawned on me early on in life that if you are exposed to Christianity and to biblical concepts and to the Bible on a regular basis, you're going to live probably more Christ-like. And yet they had these extreme issues. My dad was anger. My grandma was more extreme laziness and extreme rudeness, but cantankerousness, you might even say. But it just stood out to me from the earliest days. You can be heavily, heavily exposed to the gospel and still be an extremely unattractive person. And as a quick aside, that came out later when I was doing an internship in my church. I was supposed to find some elders who were going to be my mentors for that time. I worked directly with the pastor quite a bit, but also I wanted to be under the tutelage of elders in the church. And the way that they described it for me was they said, like, look for elders that you just like, I want to be just like you in every which way. And when I looked at that dynamic in them, I just said, I don't think there's any elders in this church that I really want to emulate. And it shook me to my core to think about it at the time, to think, are you kidding me? In a church of 400 or 500 people with, I don't know, 12, 15 elders or more, that I can't look at this church and say any of these men I want to copy, in terms of the way that they raised their kids, in terms of the way that they just acted and spoke. Now, some of them were decent enough, but it didn't seem like there was much power, or much conviction. And some of them, I knew their kids. Their kids were very, very, very poorly behaved. And I just thought, I don't know that this is really this isn't working the way it's supposed to. You're supposed to say, as a young man, I'm looking to the older men to train me to be in a mentoring relationship. And it's, going back to my dad, from the earliest days, I did not want to be like him. He would fly into rages. I remember a lot when I was a little kid, he would scream all the time at my mom, like, especially at night. We'd all go to bed and it was like a 3 or 4 story house. we'd be upstairs, and there's a main floor, then the basement. They get into the basement, but it was a house where you could hear things, and I'd go to bed hearing them screaming. And I would get on my bed and sit at the top of the stairs so I could hear a little bit better, and I would just sit there and cry, wish I could protect my mom. And he would scream at her, and there were more things, I found out later that were going on that were even worse in terms of how he treated her, but I heard the verbal abuse at that point, and I thought, "Why is he screaming at," like, she cooks our meals, she does our laundry, she cleans up, she grades his tests, she types up his tests. She's always bending over backwards to do anything she can to support us, to love us, to help us. She's a great cook. She's a lovely person. Why are you screaming at her? Almost every night, like almost every single night. And there were times it was really bad, and he'd scream at her for hours. And I would just sit at the top of the stairs and cry. And I occasionally would go down, like, to try to just break it up for a second. I'd come down and say, "Can I please have some water?" But most of the time, I knew that it wouldn't make a difference, that they would just wait, give me some water, send me up back upstairs, and they'd start up again. And she didn't really do it. She wasn't fighting. She was more just crying. But he would just scream and scream and scream at her. And I had a tremendous, overwhelming disrespect for my father from the earliest days because of it. The sweetest, kindest person in my life, my mom, was being directly attacked every single day by my dad. And it didn't make sense. Um, I know that there's always, there's two sides to every story. There may have been more to the story, but from where my vantage point, what he did was severe abuse, severe abuse. And I saw it, of course, indirectly related to me and to my siblings. So I have no doubt that it was, if there was any fault on her side, it was 1%. And if there's anything on his side, it was 99% from where I'm standing. He's passed now. He passed in 2019. And I'll go more into what happened in his later years. But his parents were always depressed, and I saw that he sort of had a depression as well, and I know that depression is often related to anger and to the feeling of hopelessness. He was a Christian school teacher. He taught at my Christian school, and it's funny, his anger came out even in school in times where I thought, "You're borderline in terms of how you treat people." I remember this one time I was in his class, Bible class, and he had this foam, like a sponge brick. It looked like a really big red brick. It looked just like a brick. And if you didn't know that it was foam, you'd have sworn it was a brick, but it was just foam, just a sponge. And this one time, this kid was talking, and my dad had told him, stop talking during class, stop fooling around. And my dad at one point, pulls out this brick, and this is a Christian school, so you can get away with a little bit more of this kind of bizarreness. But he pulls out this foam brick, and none of the kids had ever seen it, except for me. He pulls out the foam brick and he throws it at the kid. And of course, the kid screams, thinking he's got a brick coming at his head. And he doesn't. It's a sponge, and it just bounces off of him. But for the second, he's terrorized. And my dad puts out a little smile. But it was an example to me of, like, you're okay terrorizing people, even if it's a joke. Like, you're terrorizing a child. He thought a brick was coming in his head, and everyone gave it a laugh. And I'm sure it was something that everyone brushed off in a sense. And I don't know that anyone even reported it, but I would have been concerned as an adult, as that kid's parent, if I'd seen that. Um, but there were endless times like that where it became like a small event and it became an extreme hyper yelling. I have an older brother, and my dad just reamed him out all the time. I was more compliant and passive, as I talked about before. So I sort of stayed under the radar, out of the view of the worst parts of it. But when you see anger like that up close, and yet you see someone being a Christian school teacher, an occasional preacher in church, elder in church, leading devotions every night, you have a love-hate relationship with that, because you feel like this person is really living two lives, and you have to comply with the Christianity, because if you don't, then you're basically going to incur the wrath. And I think that was very much typical of what we would see in terms of what we would say about the Yahweh character, that if you don't obey him really, really well, that you're going to get his wrath. And so it made sense to me later as to how it's connected theologically, but just practically as a child, I was terrorized by my dad. And I remember too, he had a hyper control thing going on. There was something, there was a friend of mine going through a very rough time in life, and they had confided in me something, and I didn't, my dad sort of picked up on it, kept on asking about it. And I was like, Dad, honestly, I'd rather not talk about it right now. It's a really painful situation. And he had to know what was going on in my friend's life that was so painful. And, it didn't affect our family. It wasn't like he needed to know to protect us or something. It was a friend that lived far away, just going through a rough time. But my dad insisted, and because I wouldn't share, I was like, Dad, this is just such a painful thing. Can I tell you another time? And he began to just scream at me. You got to tell me. You got to tell me. And eventually it got to a huge issue. I mean, massive issue, just screaming at me for hours. Um, Years later, when I went to a church, I'm going to talk about that church probably today. It's called the Blue Church, but I'll get to that part in a little bit. But I remember going to some elders at one point, and I had no desire to like expose my dad as like this horrible monster, even though he really was, and certainly deserved it. But I remember at one point going to some elders and saying, "Look, I'm really struggling. Everything else in life is okay. I'm doing great in school. I'm doing great in all my ministry work. I'm doing great in my friendships. Life's okay. But my relationship with my dad is really tough, and it's affecting not just me, but also it affects my mom a lot." And I went to a few of the elders and just asked for support and help. And he somehow found out that I had done that. And he literally, this was maybe when I was about 17 or 18, I'm going to guess. He screamed at me like bloody murder. And that was a time when I mentioned this before, but he said to me, "I wish you were never born. I wish you'd never been born." And he said it several times. Um, and that was our Rubicon. That was our burning of the bridges. You can't tell your son, "I wish you'd never been born," especially in a context where he's hurting and looking for support and help from trauma it's been going on for, at that point, it was 15, 20 years of it, a long-standing trauma, but current active trauma at that moment. I go out and ask for help, and you say you wish I was never born just because I asked for help. And hey, Dark God 6, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you. Just going over some of my story. I'll talk about my dad here, and then we'll talk about my church in more detail. But going through it very slowly for anyone joining us or watching later, going through it very, very slowly, just chatting, just very conversational here. No, I've got no bullet points. I've got big bullet points, but nothing like I'm trying to like get through the following 10 things and then we're done. Just talking stream of consciousness, as it were, about what happened. But I went to my dad. I went to the church, asked for help, talked to a few men privately, and it got exposed. My dad said, "I wish you'd never been born." But that really taught me that this is in many ways a situation of like, he could not stand to be exposed. Yeah, I see a comment here from Panda about the same, exactly. You took the words out of my mouth. He was angry about you exposing his shamefulness, probably the aspect he hated most about himself. Exactly. I was effectively exposing him to a very small group of trusted men. It wasn't like they were going to, um, hey, William, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. William, I'm just talking about my dad, and then we'll talk about my church for a little bit. But, when I went to the church elders, a few of them privately, to talk about my dad and the abuse issues and the extreme abuse, not just towards me, but also mostly just my mom, um, he just wanted to cover it up. And I learned early on that that's a big part of Christianity. And I didn't realize how much when you look at things like everything from the sexual abuse by Catholic priests of, the altar boys and all that. When you look at the church scandals in the evangelical church, so much of it is not just about the actual scandal. It's the secondary scandal that you cannot bear to be exposed. And some of that is related to, don't bring an accusation against the Lord's anointed, that kind of verse. Don't bring an accusation unless you have 2 or 3 witnesses, which I know is very, very a big deal in the Jehovah's Witnesses. Like if you literally go to a Jehovah's Witness, I've been told this several times by XJWs, if you go to a Jehovah's Witness pastor and say, Like say a young girl says, "Hey, my uncle so and so in the church, he did something very inappropriate to me." If there wasn't another witness, then you have to let it go and just say, either it didn't happen or I just forgive you, because you can't proceed without 2 or 3 witnesses. Well, it happened probably in the dark, in the closet when no one else, there's no way for another witness to be there. And so it gets shut down right away just because of that mental block that they have, that we have to follow this verse of 2 or 3 witnesses or else we don't talk about it. But there's a real epidemic of cover up the scandal. Cover it up because we have to preserve the unity of the church. We have to preserve this facade to the world that we are godly people, and that yes, we sometimes fail, but what really matters is that we're people of forgiveness and grace and restoration. And the message of grace and restoration, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good message in life in general. A lot of us need to forgive and move on from bitterness. But when that transcends and translates into, I need to just basically cover up and ignore the fact that my abuser is out there, and knowing especially that they could do it again, but I'm not going to do anything which is going to expose them and prohibit them from probably doing it a second time. If they can find a way to move on and just do it again and again and again, then you're basically becoming part of the problem. You're becoming a perpetuator because you won't speak up. And that was something I saw early on. I didn't put the pieces together, certainly from a deconstructing sense. It was just more like, this is my personal issue. And I assumed that other families had some, in the mix of all the church families, that some of them were experiencing some hard things too. But it felt at the time like my situation was bizarre, because it was almost like he was part of my early deconstruction, in the sense of this constant message of Christianity says this, and we align with it in our beliefs verbally, in our doctrinal statement and all that, but practically we don't live it. And that's, again, very much the belief versus worldview. He believed in the gospel and the power of the gospel. He did not on his truest level live it, which means he didn't believe it. Again, we're focusing on a lot that beliefs are what you say you believe, worldview is what you really believe. They're sometimes very, very opposite, and often you cannot see what your worldview is. It's like it's invisible. It's so deep down under the surface that you just don't know. You don't realize it. And if you could see it face to face, if you could just totally see what your worldview says, it would mess with you. You'd be like, this is bizarre. Like, that's not me. Like, actually it is. No, I don't believe any of that. None of that's me. That's you. You don't know the real you. A lot of us don't know the real us. I think that's the journey I'm on. It's the journey I think a lot of you are on, is realizing you don't know the real you. And your worldview, when you see it, will both delight you and shock you and hurt you at the same time. It's not there to be your friend. It's not there to be your enemy. It just is. It's just a reality. Your worldview is basic programming. It mirrors back to you what you were taught, what you were programmed with, the indoctrination. It's just a mirror of all those years. And yeah, that's what woke me up, seeing the rotten fruit. Yeah, well said, William. And when we see that, it really, really, it gets us to a point where you have to say, and I think, either this is a one-off, this is just a bad apple in the mix of many, many wonderful examples, or this is actually part and parcel of how this works. That Christianity has something in it, in the DNA of Christianity, that makes you a hypocrite, that makes you a pretender. And I've talked about how, for me, that came out. I talked about it maybe two episodes ago, I think. But sexuality was a big deal. I wanted to be pure for God, but yet I was thinking so many sexual thoughts. It was just such a big deal. That fight of like, which one are you? Are you pure or are you sexual? Are you pure or are you erotic? And until I deconverted, eroticism was never considered, even, within marriage, it was never considered a truly something you could fully dive into. In terms of eroticism and pleasure and fantasies, there's got to be some level of shame with that, even in marriage, unless it's just like your very basic, bare bones, vanilla sort of missionary position stuff. You can't dive into it without thinking, I'm focused so much more on fleshliness and lust, even for my own spouse, than on the things of the Lord. And again, obviously that's just so crazy that that even gets into our psyche and our worldview, but it does. And you have to acknowledge that and deal with it. But going back to my dad, what happened over the years was we got very estranged as a result of that conversation that I mentioned where he said, "I wish you were never born." He had wished that, for anyone joining us late, he said he wished that I had never been born because I'd talked to a couple church elders about, my need for support and help, and the fact that I was just pretty much dying inside. Coming to church, worshiping with a smile on my face, serving like crazy, just doing endless, dozens of ministry kind of things each month, and yet I'm dying inside. And I saw that in my life where I would literally find myself sort of like a deer in the headlights, where they would say, "Can you please, do the following presentation for your youth group? Can you preach a message for your youth group?" I'm like, "Sure, of course I can. I can preach to my youth group." But I would find, they said you have 3 weeks to prepare, and then you talk to them for 30 minutes. I'd find myself with utter writer's block. Like, I can't think of a thing to say. I mean, it was weird. Like, I'm a writer. I've literally written 30-page letters to people. Like, when I was a teenager, I had friends that I was sort of like pen pals with, and I've written 30-page letters to people, handwritten them. I can write, with my hands behind my back for proverbially. I can write like crazy, and I suddenly couldn't write. I'm like, "What is going on here? How can this person be?" I can't think of a single thing to say about this devotionals. I was just like, it was like someone just shackled my brain and my arms, and I was like, I don't know what to say about 30 talk minutes. Like, this doesn't make sense. What's happening? Whoops. Sorry, I just went out there on my side. Hopefully you all can still see me. I can see myself again. So sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there. I've closed like everything I can except for StreamYard. So hopefully this doesn't blank out on me. But anyway, hopefully you can see me still or again. But I just such a writer's block. And it got to a point that I had to have help. Had to have help. And that's why I went to the elders, not to expose him in some horrific way, but he was upset because he got exposed. 3 or 4 elders or so, now knew that he's this angry man who screams at his wife and his kids. And basically, we went separate ways for a few years. I'd see him sometimes, but it was extremely like walking on eggshells. Thanks, William. Um, I lived with my grandma for a few years when I went to Lancaster Bible College, and I'll talk more about my Bible college days at some point too. But a couple of years later, my mom said to me, my mom and I were very close. We've always been close. We always will be close. Um, but we have some special things too. I was born on her birthday. We both have the same birthday. I was her birthday baby. We're the only two left-handers. We're the good people. We're the only two left-handers in the family. She took French in college and spoke French. I took French for like 10 years and spoke French, still do. And so we would speak French at home. No one else did that. So we had a lot of connections. And honestly, when she was going through the hardest times of her life, sometimes we would take long walks around the neighborhood, just her and I. And it seemed like the other kids were just not in a bad sense. They were just oblivious. They were just being kids. And I was always detecting the pain in the room. My mom told me that from the earliest days, not just about her, but about everybody. She said, she said, when you were real little, I would watch you. And she said, when there were birthday parties, you would sit there in the background and you would scan the room. And she said, I could tell from conversations that you had, you were looking for people that looked sad. So you did that from the time you were a little kid. You looked for the sadness and you went over and tried to connect with people. I did that with neighborhood kids a lot and pissed off a lot of my friends because they were like, why are you talking to that person? There was this family around the corner that when I was real little, that they had several kids that were just had severe retardation issues, like mental health issues off the charts. And, they talked funny, they walked funny, they didn't know how to dress right. They were just very, very poor, and they probably needed endless medical help. They could have helped, and they didn't have any means to do it. It was very sad. And, when those kids came around, it just was like, that's just like nobody wanted to talk to them. All the kids wanted to make fun of them. And I just went out of my way to connect with them. I was like, I got to talk to them. You know, they're clearly hurting. Everyone else wanted to make fun of them, and you know, but my mom would say that, and you know, she and I, as a result of her pain, did the same thing where we would take these long walks, and I would ask her, "How you doing?" We'd sometimes walk for, you know, half an hour around the neighborhood, just block after block, and often I'd say, "Hey, I know we walked for 30 minutes here, but can we just do it in reverse? And let's make it an hour." We talk for an hour, and um, I ended up doing that a lot privately too, where I would go out at night. You know, I know that that's sort of a privilege of a, you know, in my neighborhood wasn't super great, but just as a guy, I didn't feel like I was that scared. I felt like I could outrun everybody, so I would often go out at night, like at 11 o'clock at night, and I'd just run for an hour, which was probably more dangerous than I realized. But you know, I'd just run for an hour. I'd run for all over the place for miles, come back at midnight, and that was I'd clear my head so many times like that. But I did this with my mom, and you know, years later, when I was in somewhere in the middle of Bible college, she said, "You know, I've got some good news. I've talked to your dad about this, you know, this whole situation, and I know it's been years that this has been going on, but he wants to apologize. He wants to make this right." And I was very skeptical, and I went over to the house at the time we agreed to. I was living with my grandmom at the time, but 20 minutes away, my parents' house that I'd grown up in, and it was probably a Saturday. No one else was there, just my mom and dad and me. And we sat down at the dining room table, and it started off somewhat calm and amicable, but within 15 minutes, he was screaming at me again. And my mom started crying. His name was Dave. Dave, you promised you would make this right. Please stop. Please, please. You know, this was like a moment that had been building up to for a couple of years. And I think they've been talking about it behind the scenes for 6 months to a year. Like, you have to restore your relationship with Tim. And he starts screaming, "Get out of my house and don't ever come back." Okay. I was at that point, I developed a thick enough skin that I could just I wasn't a screamer. I was calm, as you probably can tell from my demeanor. I'm a pretty calm person. Even if there's a storm inside, I'm not gonna scream at you. But I just like, "Okay, if that's really what you want, if you want me to leave your house and never come back." And, you know, sorry it didn't work out. It was almost comical, but it was painful at the same time. My mom, of course, was over the top livid. Like, "You promised you would make this right with Tim." And that was pretty much like, again, the final, like, that was like I'd already drawn the line in the sand. I knew I would never have a close relationship with him again, but I knew it was important to try. And that was it. It was like that was the final straw. So just to sort of bring it to a conclusion for the part of the story with him, what happened over the next few years was I would occasionally see him, but what happened to him, apart from his relationship with me, was that he had gone through a depression when his mom died. Now let me tell that story real quick. When I was homeschooled, um, as a teenager, preteen and teenager, I would sometimes go to my grandparents' house, and my mom, who would homeschool us, was busy. And I remember this one time, it was scary at the time, but it's funny to think back to it. Um, I'm sitting there with my grandparents. My grandma had made some soup for lunch, and we're about to pray, to say grace before we eat lunch, just the three of us. And my grandmom says, you know, "Who's going to pray?" And I was like, "Oh, I'll pray." And her husband, his name was Emmanuel, he just was staring, and like she was used to him, like, bowing his head and closing his eyes. He didn't really pray, I don't think, much or at all, which bothered her. But like, he didn't stop staring at her. And she's like, "What's wrong?" Like, thinking, "Why aren't you bowing your head and closing your eyes? Tim's going to pray." And he didn't answer. He just sat there staring at her. And he just slowly, like, his face just goes forward, slower, slower, slower. And he just slowly descends his face towards the soup. He had had a heart attack or something, and he eventually needed a pacemaker, but he basically blacked out for 5, 10 minutes or something as a result of what was going on with his heart. And my grandma screams out, "Dear God, don't take him! Dear God, don't take him!" I'm, terrified. I'm like, and I'm like, "We need to call 911." She's like, "No, he told me never to call 911. It's too expensive." I'm like, "Can we call 911, please? Your husband's dying. Like, who cares about the expense?" So, but my mom was a nurse. I tried to call her. I couldn't get her. We had a neighbor that was a nurse. I was able to get her. She runs over and she checks him out. And she's like, "You're okay. You're going to be okay, but we're going to call the ambulance." And they get the ambulance. He goes to the hospital, and lo and behold, he needs a pacemaker. He makes it. He's fine. We thought because of that he was going to die first. My grandma ends up dying a few years later. She dies first. And I think my grandmom and my dad were very close, at least earlier in life. Excuse me, very earlier in life. So when she died, he entered a depression, a real big depression. And then his dad lived for a few more years, and he was pretty healthy. They both lived like 85, 86. And then he died, and my dad went through another depression. And that kind of was like, I think my dad's getting over things. I think he's getting back to stability, but I'm not sure. But eventually the depression kind of came back and just slowly, like it wasn't like this hard drop of like, "You're okay, you're okay, you're okay, bam, you're suicidal," or something. It was just like a slow drift. Like, he seems a little bit worse, just a little bit. And then he seems a little bit worse now. And what I eventually learned, my mom told me years later, it's like they've done a brain scan of him. And they said there's a part of his brain that's literally just shrinking. Some part was just literally getting smaller. And I don't know exactly what it was, but he eventually, over the next few years after that, he eventually spent all of his time in bed. He didn't have to, but he would spend 23 and a half hours a day in bed, not sitting there watching TV, not reading, not doing anything, just staring at the ceiling for 23 and a half hours a day as an old man. This was, at this point, I'm, an adult, got my own place and so forth. But what happened was at some point, I said to my mom, I'm just curious if dad is going to ever make this right with me. And when we talked about it with him at some point, he just said, "I don't remember any of that. I don't remember any of these conversations that you're talking about." Like, and he said, "I feel bad that the relationship isn't good, but like, I don't remember doing any of those things." And it was kind of sad to me because I realized he can't really apologize anymore. He can't make this right. He was he Did he truly forget it all? I don't know. It's too far gone to know, but he he had something in his past. And my mom and I talked about this a lot. But he had something in his past. And I asked my mom, like, "Is there something in his past that we don't know about?" She said, "Yeah, there's something in his past that we don't know about." And she's like, he's admitted to me there's something bad in his past, and he won't tell me what it is. And I guess, like, well, could it be this? Could it be that? Could he have done a crime? We don't know. No idea. He admitted he did something very wrong that he had incredible guilt for his whole life. And he was going to go to his dying day not telling anybody about it. And that was perhaps part of his anger problems, the fear of being exposed for whatever that was. No one knows. No one knows even the nature of it or the genre of what the thing was that he said, "I did something really bad at one point." Um, but whatever it was, it drove him to this anger and eventually perhaps to this depression, whether it was that or just a medical condition. His brain eventually shrunk and he spent 23 and a half hours a day in bed. When it got to a point where, I was, married and we'd come to visit from Georgia back up to Pennsylvania, excuse me, come back to visit, he would come downstairs, having not seen us for 6 months or a year. He'd come downstairs for a minute. He would say, "Hey, Tim, good to see you. Hey, kids," his grandkids. "Hey, kids, good to see you." He'd open a banana, take one bite, put it back on the counter and walk upstairs and be up there for the next 20 hours. Very, very sad. My mom did tell me that later in life, toward the end, he did show some signs that were actually quite good in the sense of protecting her. He hadn't really protected her his whole life, but my grandmom had dementia, and she would be even though my mom was so loving to my grandmom in her later years, my mom just bent over backwards to bless my grandmom before she died. My grandmom would be like, "Why didn't you come see me?" And my mom was like, "I did. I was here yesterday. You never come see me. You don't love me." She'd just scream at her in her dementia. And when my dad found out about it, even as his brain was doing this stuff, my dad said, she can't talk to you that way. And so I was very proud, to think that in his last years, he went out of his way to go with her to visit my grandmom even in her dementia and to protect my mom from being berated by her own mother. Um, so that was good. That was a good sort of a final, you know, green flag to end it. And then he died in January of 2019. But I look back at his influence in my life, and I think that's a lot of darkness. That's a lot of depression, a lot of anger, a lot of hypocrisy, and I don't know how much that all. I don't know how much that all contributed to my ultimate deconversion. I'm sure somebody could make an argument and say that's probably the whole kit and caboodle. That's the whole reason you deconverted is you had a bad dad and you think that God's the same way. You had a bad heavenly father. I don't think so. I thought through that a lot, and I'm sure there's some correlation. But the only thing that really cranked up my deconversion ever was studying comparative mythology, realizing Jesus is based on the Dionysius character and the other Greco-Roman mystery cult gods. Realizing that there was a whole bunch of other dying and rising gods, not the zeitgeist stuff, but just there were real dying and rising gods before who carried the whole motif. A lot of astrotheology, again, not the garbage of zeitgeist, but there is real astrotheology all over the Bible. These are star stories, and these are very Gnostic texts. Even the ones that don't seem Gnostic are actually Gnostic. There's all kinds of stuff woven in with gematria and things that are secret messages that if what gematria is, if you know what astrotheology is, they're looking for the initiates to look for the deeper meaning. And that's pretty obvious. But it took that stuff, endless things, 3 years of studying it to realize this is mythology. But I do look back and I think it primed the pump. It got the context ready for me to say my dad was, in my mind, a really toxic man, a really abusive man. And his version of Christianity, it's really hard to admire it. It's really hard to admire even the good times. You'd say, well, he's tried to build into you. He tried to love on you. He spent a lot of time with you, mostly with devotional time. The main core times he spent with me were devotional time and going over verses. But we had a few good times. I remember, he would, for example, he would let us ask us to clean up his wood shop. He was a wood shop teacher. I grew up, in a wood shop, and we'd clean up the sawdust, and he'd say, if you did enough, every minute you clean up, just write it down, and when you even get to 100 minutes, that's whatever, a penny per minute. I'll give you $1, and we'll use that. He didn't really give us the $1, but he'd be like, we'll use that for a treat. We'll stop for ice cream on the way home. There's a little corner shop, the nice little ice cream place, in a little town called Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. If you remember Swarthmore College, we used to drive through there. It's like, we'll stop at the little shop in Swarthmore, and we'll get a little ice cream. When you each get to $1 in your little roster for cleaning up. Those were cool times. Driving home in his Camaro with the top down. There were some interesting times of joy in the mix, but there was a lot of pain, and especially how it related to both his hypocrisy about Christianity and his severe mistreatment of my mom. To this day, that hurts. That my mom, it was my mom. I asked my mom at one point when I was a late teen, I said, Mom, I know you're against divorce, but can you at least consider separating? Saying like, look, if you get help and you commit to not being this way to me, then we can get back in the same house. There's no need for divorce to necessarily be the outcome here, but separation is appropriate. She was from a generation and a genre of biblical interpretation that said even separation is basically just a slippery slope to divorce. Do not do it. And so no matter what she did, what I said, she wouldn't consider it. Now, years later, she said, you were right, Tim. I should have separated. I should have separated back when I was probably 19 or 20 when I said it the first time. And maybe at 25 or 28, she said to me, you were right. I should have separated. But at that point, his depression was getting worse. And she said, if I leave him now, people will say, you're just leaving because the times are hard. He's getting worse in his depression. Times are hard. And, you just don't want to go through you want the good times, but not the bad times. And you're basically breaking your marriage vows. So she felt like she'd be ashamed of herself if she left when things got bad. So she never left. She never left till the end. I mean, he never left at all. She stayed until he died. Now, it was a lot easier for her, of course, when he basically became a basket case at the end. To simplify it, he was no trouble. He wasn't abusive. He just stared at the ceiling for 20 hours a day. There was no threat. She basically lived alone, with him in the house for the last few years. But that's my dad. I'm sure there's some other things that I'll think about that will come up. And again, I think it's important to try. I'm sure some of you can relate to your parents having been, mom, dad, or both, having been abusive at some point and maybe hyper abusive or neglectful. And there's some really tough memories there. But I remember, just as a quick aside too, we used to go to Bethany Beach, Delaware, and Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. I remember him, knowing that I loved seashells. There were the little stores where you can buy a seashell for 50 cents, whatever. He used to love to buy us seashells. We'd go home with 5 or 10 really pretty seashells from these specialty stores there near the beach. And he knew we loved to go crabbing in the canal, and he would help us get the trap and the bait to go crabbing in the nets. He didn't do it with us much, which was typical, but he would help us to get it set up so we could do it. He knew we would spend hours down there just trying to pull crabs out of the canal. But there in Bethany Beach, Delaware. But there was some bright spots in the mix, and he certainly had a work ethic. He worked hard to some extent, apart from issues in home. He'd keep things decent and running, and he certainly fed us. I can't complain about everything, and I don't want to end everything that I say about my dad on a bad note. But by and large, the majority of my messaging for my dad was hypocrisy and abuse. And if you're going to mix that with Christianity and tell me Jesus is Lord and the gospel changes lives, then we've got something to talk about, because these messages don't mix. They don't add up. They just really don't. So, see here. William says, you're a highly sensitive person. There was a book by that title that was recommended to me by Mike Masahiro. Thank you. I'll look that up. Very cool. My therapist just suggested that I'm an HSP, highly sensitive person. It has explained so much about my experience. Yeah, it really does. And you everything, you feel it so deeply. And that's where I think this is also, it's sort of a blessing and a curse. It's a curse in that everything bad that happens, it hurts so much worse. And especially if we're at fault for anything, that we feel the guilt and the shame so much worse. Like, oh my goodness, I've ruined my life. I've messed everything up. I'm so bad. When you have a person like that in the context of worm theology and original sin, and then it's shame culture, it just compounds and goes exponential. But at the same level, I think the highly sensitive side of us can also bring out the truth and the reality of the pain of this and the journey and the honesty that I think we're in many ways missing some of the real honesty. And I've talked about in my first session with this series, saying, where are the poets? But usually the highly sensitive people they're going to be more inclined to the poetry, because there's just so much, as as it says, out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks, and there's so much overflow for highly sensitive people. It's possibly had a TBI. Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, I'm not sure if there was an official diagnosis of that or something else, but it was sad. It was sad to see him drift, but it was also, I don't want to say I in any way relished his demise or his downfall, but it was really nice to have a calm dad. He was so calm that he was basically irrelevant. He was like just like a shell of a person, not a vegetable, but a shell of a person. But it was kind of nice to have, like, there was no threat. I mean, literally he couldn't yell anymore. He couldn't yell or get upset. He didn't observe his world enough at that point to yell. He had no possibility, no means to do so. William says, there are things that get us started in deconstruction, and then there are all the cognitive reasons that just add up until it's overwhelming. Yeah, very well said. Exactly. I did want to mention, I think I'm going to be able to do one more shorter topic today. My time at my church. Church, again, was called the Blue Church, made of Pennsylvania blue limestone. Turns a little bit blue when it gets cold and wet. I was told that, at least. I never observed it. I tried to observe it, and I never saw it turning blue, but people said, "No, it does. It turns blue." I was there for 10 years and never saw it turn blue, so I didn't quite understand why it was called the Blue Church, but it is what it is. Originally was back. The official name is called Lowndes Free Church. Pastor Lowndes had created the church in the 1800s. The Quakers were charging money for your pews. You'd rent your pew for a year for your family. Way to make some money in the church. And he said, no, church should be free. And so he created Lowndes Free Church, nicknamed the Blue Church. It was considered by my parents, I think, a little bit more liberal because it was so big. There was this fear, like there was a real fear in circles I went to, or my parents went to in small churches, that the bigger the church, the more likely you're going to have liberals. So what you really need is a small church where the pastor's a fundamentalist, the pastor is a conservative, and the pastor has control over all the messaging. The pastor, it's small enough that the pastor can control all the Sunday school teachers. It's not big enough that the rogue Sunday school teacher can kind of get away with some stuff for a while. It's small enough that there's control and there's consistent messaging. And so to go to a bigger church, it wasn't huge, but maybe 400 or 500 people at its heyday. I think it's pretty small now. It's dying. Praise the Lord. It's dying, but at the time it was pretty big. And I would attribute that in part to the pastor that was there at the time. His name was Pastor Cutnow. Pastor Cutnow, to me, was just a great guy. I loved being there with him. My dad had actually gone to Dallas Theological Seminary with my dad. My dad used to drive back and forth from Dallas to Pennsylvania on their times off from Dallas Theological Seminary. But so my dad knew him. They weren't super close friends, but they knew each other well. And so to go to that church probably had that safety net of, like, even though it's a big church and possibly some liberals there, my dad personally has known the pastor for many years. They're good friends. So we eventually went there just more for the youth group. My parents knew you guys need a youth group. You need a youth group to be able to have, teenage friends, Christian teenage friends. And the church we had been going to had nothing. So we switched churches, and it was interesting. My dad really didn't ever feel comfortable there. He never felt comfortable, even though he knew the pastor. The bigness of it and the fact that they weren't as fundamentalist really irked him. So he would often, like on Sunday nights, go to these small, fundamentalist Bible Baptist churches because he wanted to hear the fire and brimstone. He wanted to hear the gays are bad and the liberals are bad and they're all going to burn in hell, and God's going to get you, and whatever. The rapture's coming and you're going to be left behind, and he wanted to hear that stuff. So he would still get his that all that negativity. He'd get all that on Sunday nights. He'd go to different churches by himself. But on Sunday mornings we went to the Blue Church, and I was involved from the earliest days with volunteering, a lot of ministry. I got involved with our youth group. We called ourselves Crossroads, and there was a pastor there named Joe, youth pastor that came. I was there for the previous youth pastor, who was a lovely man. He moved out to Colorado to take a main pastorate job, and that was sort of the very beginning of my time as in the youth group. So as I'm getting plugged into the church, they switch youth pastors, and this youth pastor Joe comes, and he was like my best friend and mentor for the next 5-7 years. He radically affected my life, radically. He and I had so many conversations, deep theological conversations, conversations about practical things. I was always there. He could count on me to, hey, I need help. Bam, I'm there. I was just showing up big. I was part of his inner circle of the kids, even though I was young at the time, and eventually got, old enough that I could be trusted with more. But I was always showing up. And we, from the earliest days, had many deep conversations. He trusted me. I babysat his kids at one point. There was a lot of connection there. And I appreciated so much his willingness to build into my life. We had Bible studies. We called them Coram Deo, which means Latin for in the presence of God. The Coram Deo times. We had missions trips, a lot of them local to Philadelphia, to things like Kensington, to the Badlands, to do that kind of work, preaching the gospel and helping poor people, helping missionaries. We did some work. I was with him in the Dominican Republic and several other places. Trying to remember where all we went, but it was a lot of connection. And Pastor Joe, my youth pastor, meant the world to me. There were some severe issues, and eventually, at one point, we kind of parted ways, not like in any blow up. It just like he just started to rub me the wrong way. I probably rubbed him the wrong way. I just wasn't coming to the same conclusions as him. And part of that was honestly my changing theology. I was becoming more fundamentalist and more Calvinist, and he was becoming more liberal and more touchy feeling. He was going more towards vineyard movement kind of mentality. We weren't a vineyard church, but he was going more towards a vineyard movement mentality. And what happened was when the pastor, Pastor Cutnow, when he left to go to Milan, he wanted to take a church in Milan to do sort of missionary pastor kind of work. They basically opened up the main pastor position, and Pastor Joe thought, I'm a ringer. I've been here for whatever, 7-10 years. Everyone knows me. Everyone trusts me. Like this is just like clearly I should be the main pastor. There were some older people in the church that they were rubbed the wrong way by his, charismatic personality, by his charismatic tendency with music. Felt like, guitars in church were a slippery slope and a bad sign. And so they shot him down quick, and left a lot of bad blood. And so eventually he moved on, and he did. I think I didn't follow him, but I think he may have gone to a vineyard church for a while. But anyway, that was an interesting part of my journey, the Blue Church. But just going back one little step, during my time at Lancaster Bible College, I had to do an internship, and my time under the pastoral program at Lancaster Bible College to me was great. Obviously, looking back, is toxic as hell, and very misleading. But at the time, I was like, this is like absolutely what I need. We had this great guy who led the pastoral program at Lancaster Bible College, Dr. Ayers. Dr. Ayers was just my biggest hero. He was like a pastor, but in a teacher role. He would preach in class. He didn't teach the class. He preached the class. And loved Dr. Ayers. And he made us go to all kinds of different churches for exposure. He's like, I want you to go to 10 different churches, go to a Black church, a Hispanic church, go to a liberal church, go to a Catholic church, go to a Quaker church. You need to see it all. You need to know what these different churches do. Loved that he forced us to do that. I wouldn't have ever done that otherwise. But eventually, you get to the end of it and you wrap it up by way of an internship for your last year. And I did an internship under my Pastor Cutnow. We spent endless hours together. And it did culminate with a couple of times of me preaching in front of, 400 people, which was quite daunting at the time. But just a couple of interesting observations from that time frame. And we're about at an hour. I'll probably go to about an hour and 15, hour and 20, and then go through any comments as well that we have. But a couple of things that stand out from that time frame. I remember distinctly a conversation I had with him where he was talking about his personality and as well as talking about the topic of guilt. I don't know how we got onto it, but he said, Tim, I want to tell you something. When I was in college, I think it was probably before seminary for him, but when I was in college, one of my psychology classes, they made us take a big psychology exam. And he said, at the end of it, my professor called me in with my results, and he said, I got to talk to you. Your scores indicate that you don't suffer from any guilt at all, like zero guilt, ever. You're never guilty. For a Christian and just a guy and a human, I don't understand. Did you mislead us on your answers regarding questions that had anything to do with guilt? Or do you like, tell me, do you ever feel guilty about anything? And he apparently said, no, I literally feel no guilt ever about anything. And he's like, you realize that the only kind of people that could say that are either people that are truly don't feel guilt, which is, I guess, an amazing blessing if you don't feel guilt, or you're a psychopath. Psychopaths don't feel guilt. He's like, well, I'm not a psychopath. And I asked him, like, you really feel no guilt? Like, you've never had a lustful thought? I was like, I'm covered by the blood. I'm covered by the cross. But plus, why would I want to spend my time focusing on the past? If I've messed up and God's forgiven me, the time that I need to focus on is you're in a moment of forgiveness and a moment of look to the future. Look to what God has for you from the future. Why dwell in the past for even a second? It doesn't do any good. All the dwelling in the past does is it kills your present and future. Why? You've already lost the past. Why lose the present and the future too? And I thought about that many times over my life. I can't figure out how to flip that switch. But, um, it made me think a lot. Made me think, what does it mean to truly believe in grace and forgiveness and a guilt-free life? And I thought, well, you still should feel like some conviction. He's like, yeah, I feel conviction, but I get back on my feet real quick. I feel conviction. And I'm like, well, isn't that guilt? Like, no, I just feel like God's saying you shouldn't have done that. Move on. And I move on like in a snap. And I always wondered about that. I always wondered, was he telling the full truth? I think he was. But the other thing that stood out to me, and this shook me up a little bit more. When I was doing my last sermon, I was preaching, and it was we were using I was going through Colossians. I loved Colossians at the time. I now realize that is that book is Gnostic as hell. If you ever read Colossians, oh my god. But, I was preaching through Colossians and talking through what it means to be the firstborn of all creation. And it's not what I preached it was. It's very different. We're talking Gnosticism and, that stuff on steroids. But at the time, it's important as a Christian to explain this is not Gnosticism, and we're not saying Jesus was an emanation. We're not saying Jesus is the firstborn, meaning he's the first one born. He was never born. He's always existed. You have to defend all that garbage. And so I was going through it. It's a pretty tough passage, and I was dealing with it very technically. I was dealing with the Greek and blah blah blah. But I remember at the end, we're looking for an example for one of my points, and there's a story of when Napoleon, I think it was Napoleon, when he died, he was considered at that point, and he considered himself to be like the greatest. Like he was just like the echelon, highest echelon. And he put himself highly above everybody else. He was so arrogant and pompous. And there's a story that's told about somebody that was part of the funeral procession and the final, ending of that process, that when there were candles at his funeral, apparently somebody, I'm just gonna guess it was like one of the religious leaders who came up to the final candles near the casket or something and said, like, blew it out and said, "No one is great but God." Sort of a final stab at Napoleon's arrogance. You're dead now, and you're lying here decaying in a casket, and your candle just went out. You're not so great. No one is great but God. And I said to my pastor, I cannot confirm who said this. I've seen different sources say it was a general. I've seen a source say it was a priest. I can't confirm who said it. And he literally said to me, "It doesn't matter. Make it up. Make it up and make the point that people won't care who said it. People won't care what research you did about who said it. Just say it was a general. Say it was the highest general that was left who blew out the candle and said, 'No one is great but God.'" And I did. I lied to my congregation. Told this story about who said it. And it's like, well, that's pretty small pickings. Yeah, but I did not have a way to confirm and verify who said that quote. And my pastor said to me, just say it was this. People don't care. They care about the impact. They won't listen to, was it a general or a priest or somebody else? Was it his widow? Was it, was children who said it? They will care about the words. They will care when you go, when you blow out that candle with your voice into the microphone really loudly, and then you have a silence, a real dramatic silence, and then you say, "No one is great but God." That's what they'll hear. And it disturbed me because he basically told me to lie. And it disturbed me because I took his advice and did it. It's like, well, is it a white lie? What you're going to tell a white lie in front of a congregation? And I felt so guilty about that. I still do. That was wrong, you know? That was wrong to make it up. But it made me think too, to my pastor, what are you making up? Are you making stuff up? You're the one that preaches 3 times a week. What the hell are you making up? If I'm allowed to make something up just once, but you preach 3 times, 4 times a week, what are you making up? I should have never done that. I shouldn't have taken his advice. I should have just left, should have found another example. I can't verify it. I don't know who said it. I can't make this up. I cannot use this example. Either I verify it or I pick a different example. But I did it. I lied to my congregation about a historical event. And that, you were talking something 25 years ago. It still hurts to this day. I suspect that that is not that uncommon now. I suspect pastors lie to their congregations about everything from anecdotes to scientific facts. It was the first and only and last time I ever did it. And again, I was very sad that I'd done it. It still hurts. It hurts to admit it. But these are the kinds of things that the Christians, I think they think it doesn't matter that much. It's not a big deal. And when you deconstruct, you realize facts really matter. It matters where that anecdote came from. I need to hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What is the story here? And when you realize that that's more likely, very, very common, that pastors are lying to you, stretching the truth, leaving out important aspects of it, you realize I can't trust you guys. And that's the thing that bothers me a lot, is they don't seem to realize once that trust is broken, it puts into question everything from that pastor to the church elders to even the Bible itself. If you, my pastor, can lie, well, why couldn't the elders and pastors and early church fathers have lied in the first 200-300 years, of the AD era? Why couldn't they have lied? Why couldn't they have been more about power and presentation and facade? Why do we believe that? If my pastor today can do it, it's a lot easier to verify things today, by and large, especially with the internet. I did not have it then, but if you can verify stuff today and people still lie, then how could you not have some people lying when you couldn't verify anything? Especially some of those people were illiterate. They had no way to verify what the elders were saying. It primes the pump. And I think that's a fascinating piece of this, is looking back at our worldview and saying it's so contrasting and ironic, this separation of we were digging deep into Christianity. And at the same time, they're literally planting seeds that would eventually get us back out. They're pushing, and we're pushing ourselves gladly. I went deep into theology, deep into ministry, deep into Calvinism. But the seeds were all there. The seeds were all there. A few other final things about the Blue Church. I'm going to talk more about this later, but I'm going to just present. I'm going to present this sort of in seed form. This is probably one of the most painful things in my life. I talked yesterday about a very painful part of my life, but I'm going to talk about something that was much more painful. To wrap up my story of the Blue Church. So, and before I'll just say, I was in some elders meetings. I was in a bunch of elders meetings too, and that's revealing. I won't say too much about that, but that's a circus. That's a circus, and the elders meetings are not what you think they are. It's a circus, and they're a mix of people that are inadequate, inept, passive, that don't care, cantankerous, the whole 9 yards. But that was craziness. I did eventually become a pretty significant part of the youth group, I should mention. We had our youth pastor eventually. He didn't get the pastorate, the main pastorate. And so he moved on from the church, and eventually another guy named Edwin, real lovely guy. I forget which country he was originally from, but Edwin Escalante. Great guy, spoke Spanish. So he was great on our trips to the Dominican Republic. He was our golden ticket to communicate. Edwin was just a heart of gold. I loved Edwin. We haven't kept in touch, but he's just a beautiful, beautiful man. Um, Edwin and I were very involved in the youth group, and we eventually got to a point where when there was no youth pastor left, and they couldn't hire one for a while, they eventually were like, you know what, Edwin and Tim, you are so involved in this. You're basically carrying the torch. Can you guys just carry the torch for a while? Like, we would love to just slow this process down of looking for a new youth pastor. Can you guys do it? We had some guys that were good on the guitar and drums, and so we had music covered. Edwin and I just tag teamed with preaching, and it was great. We did it. We didn't do much ministry outside of the youth group, but we did all the ministry stuff of the youth group for a good year and a half. Eventually, one of the fathers in the church, his kid wasn't a youth group, his kid was real little, but one of the fathers in the church became convicted. He needed to get involved in the church more, and he asked if he could get plugged into the youth group. And eventually, he kind of took over more as the older. He was in his 30s, early 40s maybe, but he was older, and he had a high level of respect in the church. And they eventually said, let's try to transition him to be the final say in this. Like, you, Tim and Edwin, you still stay involved, but this other guy, Rob's going to take over. He's going to be the sort of the main interim youth pastor until we hire somebody. I didn't stay at the church long enough to know what happened after that, because this is what happened last. This is my exit from the Blue Church, and this still hurts. And I need to share a context and then go back to the Blue Church. So I was married once before. So there's 2 marriages. The first marriage literally lasted a day. So that's weird. Yeah, it's very weird. When I went to New Tribes Mission to overseas to be a missionary, I really wanted to know and understand what a missionary's life was like, because this is what I'm committing myself to. So I went to New Guinea, lived in the grass huts, lived with tribal people for 7 or 8 weeks. It was a great experience. Went to a small island called New Britain, where you have to take a really small airplane, like a 2 or 3 seater or something. You have to get, the pilot takes you over, and you land in literally a grass field, not a real field, just like a grass field, very gently lean, but it's just scary. You're like, that's where we're landing. And then, when you finally land, you take like a Jeep or something for 2 hours further deeper into the rainforest, and then you hike for another 4 hours to this tribe. Like you're in a bad spot. Like, you have a lot of vaccines you've taken, but like if a snake bites you or you break a leg, like you're in bad shape. You're not going to get to a hospital. You're in the middle of nowhere. But we spent most of our time not on New Britain, but most of it on the mainland of New Guinea. And there was a girl there from England. And I really, 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 really just fell head over heels and thought, this girl wants to live for the Lord and do missions. And we hit it off, but I waited to the end. I sort of waited to the last week, and I sort of confessed, we had, you couldn't spend too much time privately, but I had a chance in a setting where I could kind of talk with her privately. And I just sort of confessed, like, look, I know that this is crazy. You're from England. I'm from the US, but what do you think? We're both willing to give our lives, spend our lives for Christ. I think we'd be a great fit. And she thought about it, and she said, I think you're an awesome guy. I'd be wide open to it, but I don't think that I think the distance of England versus US is just too far to reach. We just can't do it. And she was sort of, leaving it like, I'm honored, but I'm heartbroken, and the distance is just too much. And so we went, I was kind of heartbroken, but I kind of went back with my tail tucked between my legs to the US, and, it was just parted ways as friends, and we all kept in touch. We had shared emails and so forth, and the group stayed in touch for a few months. It's just sort of quieted down. But about a month, I think, after the trip was over and I'm back in the US, I get an email from her saying, hey, I think I was wrong. I think I want to take the adventure. I want to do this. are you still open to considering a courtship? And I was like, of course, of course. So we began to talk on the phone, and there was probably some kind of early version of Skype or something at that point. But, we talked on the phone and some occasional video chats or something, but we found a way to communicate on a very regular basis. And um, back when it was much, much, much more expensive to do that. And we'd talk every day, and we absolutely fell head over heels, but it was purely like a phone call relationship. I had no way to know what she was really like. And after about a year of just constantly being in touch, I eventually, I did fly over um, for Christmas, and we spent Christmas there in England together at her mom's house, and she had a brother. And it was weird. I saw some red flags in the way she treated her brothers. Very, very, very weird to me. Like, she's like, this doesn't add up. She's like really mean to him, and he's really mean to her. I hadn't seen any of that. Like, I knew nothing about this. And I remember at one point, saying, "Hey, can I chat with you privately?" And we talked about it. I was like, "I just don't understand." And she's like, "He and I are always antagonistic. It is just so. It's like the bane of my existence. We've always fought since the earliest days." And I'm like, "I know, but like it just feels like you're like this is really kind of scaring me the way that you're treating him. He's not treating you well either, but kind of scares me. Like, what? I don't understand, and I don't feel I don't know what to do about this." And she, cries about it, and she's like, "You're right. I'm sorry." And it kind of eases up. Um, a few months later, I come back, and we spend more time together. And I've come this time with a ring, and we take the train over the channel, under the channel, over there, under the channel. We take the train under the channel. We go to Paris for a day, and I propose to her on the Eiffel Tower, the second level, halfway up. I think there's like 3 levels. At the time, the third highest level was not available, but we went to the top we could get to, the second level. And in New Guinea, when you propose to a girl, you give her a present, like it's called a kina shell. It's a really big seashell, massive, beautiful, pearlescent seashell. And I had bought one of these when I was in New Guinea. And you also give pigs, like to her dad. You give pigs that's like the dowry, and or something like that. And so I had come with this little stuffed animal pig. So I we're sitting there in the little room on the Eiffel Tower in the middle, um, on a bench, and I pull out of my backpack. She didn't know I had anything with me, but pull out this little pig, and she's like, "What is that? You're pulling out a little pig." And then I pull out a kina shell, and by the time I pull out the kina shell, she knows what's going on. She was remembered enough of that culture to figure out the kina shell part of it. So I pull out the little pig, and I pull out the kina shell, and I get down on one knee, and I propose on the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And she, of course, says yes. And it's like, God has restored the years the locusts have eaten. Look at what great things God has done. He's preparing us for missions work. This is great. God, little did I know. I mean, oh my God, what was about to happen? So 6 months later was the wedding date. We got married in the church, little church in England, beautiful little church. The whole, whatever. My family came over. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. We had a weird reverse church service entrance where we were trying so hard to be like biblical. I mean, being biblical was like everything to us. And I talked to this guy that had been my pastoral teacher at school, Dr. Ayers. I said, can you tell me what are some ways to make a wedding really honor God? And he said, let me tell you an idea. So I saw this once, and I said, I think it really reflects well on people's theology evolving. So I saw a marriage once where instead of the man waiting up front and the woman coming in her white dress to pomp and circumstance, he said, I saw the man come in second. And I was like, why did the man come in second? It's like, because we're trying to exemplify the church and its groom. And in the Bible, the church is not waiting. I'm sorry, the Lord is not waiting for his church. The church is waiting for the groom. The bridesmaids are trimming their oil wicks. They're waiting for the arrival of the groom. The groom's arrival is the big deal, not the bride. The bride is just, not incidental, but she's the one sitting there waiting, and her hero comes in on a white horse, so to speak, Jesus. The groom comes in, and that's when the marriage starts, when he returns, and the bride just sits and waits. And I thought, what an interesting way to represent theology. So I was second. She came in first to pomp and circumstance, but I'm sure people thought to themselves, where is Tim? I came in second to a different song, and the pastor explained pretty quickly, the British pastor explained pretty quickly what was going on, why I was second, explained the theology, and he sort of presented it like, this couple really, really wants to honor God with their theology. And we got through this beautiful, picture-perfect wedding. And we go outside to the courtyard to do some pictures. And she starts whispering to me that she's going to be nasty to me, and she's not going to stop. Literally, like, I'm going to be nasty to you, and I'm not going to stop. And I had no way to even begin to process it. Like, is this a joke? Like, that's a really weird time for a joke like that. And it got literally weird and bizarre immediately, like within an hour. Like, everything changed in an hour. And to this day, I don't know, was she after a green card? Was she just self-deceived? What was going on? But I was so committed to, maybe this is just the stress of she's about to move to a new country, because we were going to go to the mission school together in the US. Maybe she's under, it's the weird stress of that, moving countries, leaving her mom. I don't know, but I had no thought to myself of, oh my God, like, what is this? And I should have seen it from the red flag of how she treated her brother. But it basically ended. Like, we had never been in the same country for more than a few days. And Davy Bob asked, no sex at that point. No. No, it was certainly a purity. Purity was front and center in every which way. But it was over during the wedding photos, and it never, ever, ever, ever changed. It never got better. We flew to the US, and it was just like an immediate nightmare. And before long, it was 2 houses, living in 2 apartments. And what happened, I'm going to bring it back to the church. The church immediately wrote me off. The church I had been in for, at that point, 15, 20 years. They taught me as a little kid. I taught their kids. I preached. I did ministry. I was highly respected. And they said, look, it comes down to one real simple thing. If you loved her right, she wouldn't be acting out. If you loved her right, she would be the most loving, caring, kind person. Clearly you did something. I was like, well, how can I have done something? It literally started in the wedding photos. Like, there was not even an hour that passed since this started. Like, I had no chance to do anything to mess this up. She just literally started whispering in my ear. I was like, this is like a psycho kind of behavior. And they basically said, no, you're clearly a bad guy. You're clearly wrong on this. And if you're going to talk back to us as the elders, then we're going to double down. Like, you're wrong. Now you're wrong because you won't take our advice. You need to humble yourself. And at first, there were seasons where I did. I was like, I must be doing something wrong. I must be. But eventually, they literally stopped talking to me. I'd go to church, and nobody would talk to me. A big church, full of elders, full of deacons wives and families. Nobody would talk to me. I'd sit in the back, and nobody would say hi. Nobody would come up and say, how you doing? I'd just be by myself. And I stayed there for probably a year and just kind of went into the church quietly. I I sat in the back pew for a year, just kept on going. They utterly thought she could do no wrong. Obviously, eventually, there was an official divorce, but it hurt on so many levels. But you're focusing at this point on the church, they knew me well enough to trust me. They knew me well enough for years to know my heart. And they had this construct in their head that if your wife has any issues, it must be your fault as a man. And they stood by that firmly to the point that there was just no reason to go. There was no way to go back. There was no reason to go back to church. I knew the pastor was sort of giving me the evil eye all the time. The elders just ignored me. And so this church of 15, 20 years, I just kind of quietly drifted off into the night. No one ever reached out. No one said, "Hey, Tim, you haven't been to church in a month or in 6 months." Nobody sent a postcard or an email or a text and said, "Where are you? What's going on? Are you okay? We haven't seen you. Can we talk?" Not a single fucking person reached out to me. To this day, nobody reached out and said, where the hell are you? I just drifted off into the night. A leader, I led their fifth grade, a 5-year-old class for years. As an early teen, I led the youth group for years. I was a pastoral intern, never a candidate, but a pastoral intern. I was involved in everything. I had a key to the church for years. I literally had a key. I was a key holder, like one of 10 people that had a key to the church. I was a key holder. And now not a single person would even talk to me. Years later, nobody reaches out at all. Between these, the marriage ending immediately and the church writing me off, there was a year that I spent most of my time when I wasn't working literally just sitting in a dark room. There was no reason to watch TV. There was no reason to do anything. There was early internet at that point. There was some things you could do. I'd come home from work and just leave the lights off and just sit on the sofa for a year. Nobody reached out. My own family didn't reach out. They didn't know how to deal with it. They said, "We don't know what to do with this." Because everything is like, "You guys are missionaries. You're a missionary couple. You're headed to the mission field." It's like, "No, we're not." And I believed for so long that God would fix that. I could not bring myself to say the word divorce. I mean, it was obvious. We weren't even living, in the same place. We didn't see each other. It was just, water under the bridge. But if technically, officially, we were still legally married. And she was getting her green card, which that may have, for all I know, that may have been what this was all about. This may have been about a green card. But she got her green card eventually. And, before long, the divorce got finalized. But that church never reached out to me. I went into the darkest time of my life at that point. I would argue it's a little bit darker right now. But up to that time, I went through the darkest time of my life. And they didn't give a rat's ass about me. And I don't mean some people reached out. I mean nobody. Not a single person. In a church of 400. And some of them had been my best friends. And they let me rot in my grief and in the accusations they made that I somehow brought this upon myself. And there was no way this was absolutely separate from me. This was something that she was committed to beforehand. It was obvious this was premeditated. To this day, I don't know where to put all that stuff. I don't know where to put it. These are my people. These are my best friends. These are my counselors. It was interesting. One of the steps that I went through, they asked me to meet with a counselor, and there was a pastor of a different church who had left his pastorate a few years earlier, and he'd become a full-time counselor. His name was Ralph. And Ralph, they said, why don't you go to Ralph? Why don't you? He's a good therapist. He used to be a pastor. We all know him. Everyone knows him. And I went to Ralph as a counselor. I think it was obnoxious, the kind of fees that were involved for getting help. And he was coming to some similar conclusions. Tim, this is your fault. He was with the same mindset totally. But at one point, he said, you know what, Tim, I think this is. I'm about to show a little bit of the sarcastic side of me coming out, so I apologize. I don't like to be super snarky all the time, but this story is going to bring it out. And we're talking about something, again, this is very, very long time ago, decades ago. But after a while of meeting with him and not really making any progress, he said, you've told me that you struggled with insomnia for years. At this point, I had not moved to Georgia yet for the therapist that helped me get over my insomnia. He said, maybe this is a brain thing. Maybe this is a brain thing. He's like, and I honestly think that maybe this is like a psychological issue. Maybe there's something wrong with your brain. He said, I'm going to encourage you and insist that you take a specific psychological test. He's like, it honestly is going to tell us if you're even like cuckoo bananas. This is a very intense test. And he told me what kind of test it was. And so I found a psychotherapist. And this guy said, this test is it's actually 3 tests in one, but he said, this is the test that they give to politicians and police officers. He said, these are very intense tests. He said, this will cost you $1,000 and insurance won't cover it. And this will prove through and through whether you're crazy or not. And I took the tests. I took, it's like 8 hours worth of tests. And gave him the results, and he sends them off, for their results, and he gets the results, and the psychiatrist pulls me back in. We do like a final wrap-up session before he sends me back to the counselor. And he says, Tim, before I tell you your results, he's like, I think you already know the results, don't you? And I said, well, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think my brain's fine. He's like, yeah. These tests, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy at all. These tests show you're very healthy. So you're dealing with some grief from your dad, and that shows up in the tests. It's like, there's nothing wrong with your brain. You're not crazy. You're not insane. You're not psycho. None of the things and nothing to do with your sleep. Your sleep's not messing with your ability to think. He's like, we're going to go through this test step by step. I'm going to show you what it says. But it's like, big picture, before you even do it, you're fine. It's like, I think you knew you were fine. You're just trying so hard to jump through their hoops. You knew you were fine because we spoke a time or two before the test. He's like, I thought you were fine before you took the test. And he offered him. He's like, are you sure you want to take this? Are you sure you need to? And I said, I need to know for sure. I need to know if this is my fault. He's like, all right, we'll do it. I took this fucking test, and he tells me, there's nothing wrong with you. But you already knew that. He said, I already knew that. I can just by talking to you, but especially now with this test result, I can tell there's nothing wrong with you. And I've still got it. It's a 300-page report on me, psychological report on me. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with you. Why are you doing this? Why are you letting them control your life? Why are you letting them throw accusations against you that cost you so much money? And again, fortunately, It's all old stuff. This is, 20 plus years ago, but it still hurts, as you can see. And that psychiatrist was so kind to me. He's like, Tim, you've been through so much. They have abused the shit out of you. And the fact that they convinced you to take this test, they're still doing it. They're controlling you, and this is wrong. So he sent me back to the counselor. And this is where I might have been wrong in saying this. But I emailed him a copy of my results. I forget if I emailed this or I said it to his face. I forget which one, but I think it was an email. That's right. It was an email. We never actually met again. That's right. I emailed him and said, Ralph, here's the email. Here's the test results. I said, you can shove it up your ass and I want my $1,000 back. And he emailed back and said, there's your proof that you're toxic. There's your proof that you're abusive. I don't even need the test. Your answer proves to me that you're the problem. I never, ever spoke to Ralph again. Ever. No one from my church ever called. My mom asks me sometimes, when you moved to Georgia for this special doctor that helped you fix your insomnia, once it got fixed, why don't you move back to Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania for me, and this is not to knock anyone that lives in Pennsylvania and loves it, but Pennsylvania to me is trauma upon trauma upon trauma upon trauma. I lost my life. I lost my church. I lost my friends. I lost everything in Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful place. I can certainly appreciate. My mom now lives in Lancaster County, right in the middle of Amish country near the farms. I can absolutely appreciate the beauty of Pennsylvania and that there's a lot of much more in Pennsylvania I've never even seen and all that. But the part of Pennsylvania that I was in, to go back there would feel like ripping open old wounds so much. It's hard for me to go back to Pennsylvania at all. And still to this day, people don't care. And it was parallel when I left Christianity. Excuse me. When I left Christianity years ago, Christians didn't reach out. They didn't care. And I learned when you're in Christianity and then you get out, that's what they can't stand. If you're not in it, if you're like, oh, I've never been a Christian, but someday I might get serious about God, they see you as a mission field. But if you've been in it, and you know how the sausage is made, you've been a leader, you've been involved in the theology, you've been neck deep in everything, you've been a key holder, and then you leave, you are an existential threat. And they cannot stand existential threats in Christianity. The idea that you might be right and they're wrong and utterly wrong about the majority of things that they say, they can't take that. The terror of what if atheism is correct? The terror of what if the Bible is not from God or it's not inerrant? They cannot take that possibility. And so they must hate you. They must write you off. They must absolutely eviscerate you and try to make you look bad or try to just silence you. And that has happened to me several times in a major way. I don't think they realize when you go through that, and a lot of you have been through something that's similar or parallel. When you realize where these people's hearts are, and maybe you realize it through the kind of stories I'm talking about, or maybe you just realize it because of like the Trumpism. Like, how are you all supporting Christian nationalism and this racism and this bizarre stuff. Like, this is insane that you're supporting him. How can you be Christian and MAGA? There's just no way. Like, yeah, like this is us. Like, this is our hearts finally coming out. You're like, if MAGA is Christian and that's what you've been preaching this whole time, I thought you were preaching something radically different. If this is what this is about, then I misunderstood and you misrepresented yourself. And either way, we're done. You are not my people. That hurts so much. It hurts to lose your family, physical or spiritual. But that's my story. That's my Blue Church story. I have nothing to do with them. I did have an interesting interview, just for FYI, in case you want to watch it. There's an interview I did a long time ago with a guy named Caleb. Caleb is the son of the youth pastor I mentioned. And Caleb deconverted. I don't know if he considers himself more of an atheist or an agnostic, for both, but I got permission from my youth pastor, from our youth pastor. I said, I don't want to disrespect you. And if your son and I are talking, if you don't want him to be on my channel because of our background of having worked together for years in church, I'm cool. It's like, no, it's his story. It's his story. As long as you're respectful, you know what disrespect looks like, And we were very respectful to him, but he shared his story, kept it his story. And it's just crazy how it's crazy how the pendulum swings. I've interviewed Chuck Swindoll's son, who many of you know deconverted. I haven't yet interviewed Abraham Piper, who I've tried to get in touch with him. I can't get a response from him, but Abraham Piper, the son of John Piper, the guy that did the Thief in the Night movie, his son Jamin. I've interviewed Jamin, and Jamin has his own channel. This was like the core movie of the Rapture time frame, when the Rapture was like at its height, apart from the Tim LaHaye Left Behind series. But like before that, the Thief in the Night stuff, this guy, his son Jamin, is now deconverted. Christianity is not what we think it is, both in terms of its content and its truth claims, but also it doesn't have the hold of and the power. I think one of the major themes of my life is people keep telling me the gospel has power, and it doesn't. I've seen it. My dad didn't have the power of the gospel changing his life. My grandma that I lived with didn't have it. My church, my elders, so many people. The gospel has zero power. If there's any power that looks superficial, it's just humans pulling themselves up saying, I'm done being a whatever. I'm done being a drug addict. I'm done being a drunkard. I'm done being a bad guy. I'm done whatever. I want to get my life together. That's just humans getting their life together. That's not the power of the gospel. With the right community and the right support, anybody can pull themselves up, especially if they have help for mental health. If you can pull yourself up, that's not evidence. Just because you're in a church when it happens doesn't mean it's the church that did it or the gospel that did it. It's just humans pulling each other up saying, we as a community are better than this. Anyone that's down and out, let's help you get on your feet. That's not God. That's humans helping humans. There's no power in the gospel. And I've seen that so many times. I feel like I probably should talk another hour about this. I also feel like I would repeat myself. I'm going to wrap it up in a minute, but I just want to say there is so much pain for so many of you. Some of you could tell your similar story. Some of you have channels where you probably do or will. Some of you maybe need to do interviews with me and share your story. But this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you get down. I mean, stories matter. And I think, one of the things that I've believed for a long time is when you bring things into the light, they lose their power. When you bring secrets into the light, they lose their power. Tell your story. Bring it into the light. You don't have to hide. And some of these things to me are so shameful. You were married once before the first time? Like, what? And now you just had another divorce? Like, you're now a twice divorced person, technically? Oh my God, like, wow, like that's so shameful. Bring your story into the light. If anybody wants to judge away. Judge me all you want. I don't care. It already hurts enough. It hurts enough for 10 lifetimes. You want to add something to it? Trust me. I've been there, done that. I've been in the darkness. I've seen the accusations. I've seen the fingers pointed. I know. I've been through the dark night of the soul, and I'm going through another one right now. Probably much worse even than everything I've shared with you. I'm going through it. I know what that feels like. But at some point you have to say, I'm going to stop being ashamed. I'm going to stop being ashamed of my journey and just say, it is what it is. This is where I've been, what I've been through. And from this point forward, I'm going to do my best to recover and to help those around me recover and to be honest with where I've been and with the pain. Yes, be honest with our own mistakes, but also be honest with the trauma and the abuse that has happened to us. And it is off the charts. Thank you all for letting me share my story. Let me get to some final comments here, and we'll wrap up. Yeah, absolutely, Panda. Thank you. Yeah, it's. I think sharing our stories is crucial. Absolutely. By the way, Panda and anyone else, if you're in touch with me or not yet on Facebook, please do. My handle's Harmonic Tim on Facebook, all one word, Harmonic Tim, and I would love to get you on the schedule to hear your story. Yeah, in many ways, it does feel like so many people. I mean, you want to believe better of them, but ultimately, the consistent message is that they are hypocrites who don't really care. And that's sad. Holy spit, the gaslighting and the certainty that they have because it has to be the way they see things, even when they know you, who you were. Yeah. Yeah, like they knew me. They knew me through and through. And the Harmonic Atheist was born. Yeah, certainly the early deconstruction phase was born. I didn't have any clue that it would end in atheism, and it really didn't. Again, my journey was much more focused on comparative mythology, but the seeds were there. The things that would have shackled me to Christianity, such as you have such a close relationship with your church and such a, so many evidences of God's working in life, that all had just faded and faded and faded. And I just asked myself for years, like, why? Like, God, what's this about? What is this about? Anyway, yeah, it is unimaginably hard. Thank you. And it makes you better. Yeah, well, my phrase, the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think the phrase I prefer is what doesn't kill you kills you slowly. What doesn't kill you kills you slowly. The silence from the church is deafening. I've been there sitting at home crying alone while they get to keep living. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And holding their heads high that they've been stellar and done the right thing. When I first went to my pastor about my Bible study leader spreading gossip about me that destroyed my life, he said that I had brought it all on myself. Yeah. They have to keep that party line. I mean, if it's not straightforward, straight and narrow, you do it God's way, you do it the Bible's way, you submit to authority in every which way. Anything else in that, and it's your fault. Jason says, I have a similar story. Sadly, worked hard for 2 years to buy my church land, and they stole it and kicked me out. That's awful. I'm so sorry. So sorry, Jason. Yeah, that's an awful story. My heart breaks. I hope you're doing at least somewhat better at this point. What really hurts is that you invest your time, your life in these people because you care and think they care in return, but you actually get undeniable evidence they do not care at all. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. It's just a club. Yeah, it really is. Shannon says, your heart is so powerful, Tim. Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate your support and encouragement so much. I really do. Panda says, I asked my mother-in-law if she thought that I was lying when I was a Christian. She said no, she didn't see it as an act. I told her that I then had to have a really good reason to stop believing. Yeah. Yeah. And they by and large don't care. William says they have to do whatever they can to erase you. Yeah. And we'll wrap up with this one. Shannon says, thank you so much for your story. Absolutely. Thank you, Shannon. If you're still here, thank you so much for your support. I did just want to mention I am on the fence about whether or not I can continue the Harmonic Atheist channel the way I've been doing. I just don't have anywhere near enough support. I'm basically at a spot where, having gotten past some of the personal things that have taken over my focus over the last few weeks and months, I'm back at a spot where I'm starting to book interviews again. I'm starting to crank up the work and the live streams and the monologues. I'm excited about what's coming, but I am at a spot where it may not be possible. I may have to take a break. If anyone can support me in a more greater way, all the links, and I'd prefer, if it's an option, to support me. You know, the YouTube gifts. By the way, I should mention here, William had one that I meant to highlight. I really appreciate these video streams from you. It helps so much to know that I'm not alone. I felt similar when I finally found an online Christian group of men with same-sex attraction. Thank you for your super chat. And yeah, I'm so glad that we're able to be friends and part of this journey together, and definitely not alone. And it definitely helps when you find people that are able to relate. It really does. So thank you for your support. But I just want to mention, if anybody is able to support me, the preferred way is through the other methods besides YouTube, super chats and so forth. YouTube holds money for about 6 or 7 weeks. The other methods like PayPal and all that, they send it obviously pretty quickly. So if it is an option for anyone to support me on a larger level, and a small level is fine, but especially in a large level, I am right on the edge of whether or not I can continue this. If I have to back off, it will be a season. I'll be back, and I'll still do some, but I'm definitely struggling with having enough to take care of everything. And so I would love to continue. I feel like I'm basically priming the pump to just start, doing a ton of stuff. I feel like I'm about to be here like on YouTube all the time, but it may be that it's not an option just purely because the money's not sufficient at this point. So I would love to say I'm going to be here, and I'd love to keep going, but I do need significant support to do so at this point. So if that's something you or anyone you know can consider, please consider it. I really do want to be part of the community, and I want to be doing this full time. I want to be focused, and I think my voice and our voices are critical in this. There's so many voices talking about the academics and the philosophy, but I don't see as many people talking about the trauma as well as the poetry, as well as sharing your stories in the same way. And I think that's a critical piece of this that we need to focus on. I think we bring an aspect to this that you don't see that often, and I really do hope that we can keep this going. But I will do my best. If any of you can support me through the preferably the non-YouTube means, they're all beneath this video. I really, really appreciate it. But I'll be back again probably tonight to share the next part of my story, and appreciate your kindness in being part of my life. Talk to you soon. Have a great day.